Hey, what's going on, guys? Ben Brewster here, treadathletics.com. Today I'm going to be breaking down Jurrangelo Cijntje. First things first, he's 21-year-old switch-pitcher. Rob Manfred called him a switch-handed pitcher, which I just don't think that sounds quite right. He signed for $4.8 million the day I'm recording this. So he was signed by the Mariners and he went 15th overall. He's also the first ambidextrous pitcher ever drafted in the first round, and one of only a couple that I've ever even seen or heard of. Real quick, before we get too deep into his kind of intro, something about his arsenal and a couple other details. If you want to jump straight to the breakdown, go ahead and check the timestamps down below, and you can jump straight to the actual mechanical breakdown part of this video. For now, let's start talking about his upbringing. So he was actually born in the Netherlands, which is where his dad was playing overseas professionally, but he actually was raised in Curacao. Natural left-handed pitcher, which I thought was interesting because he actually throws harder from the right side, but he is naturally a lefty. He actually began throwing righty to emulate his dad when he was a kid, so I thought that was a pretty cool story. He went viral pitching the Little League World Series for Curacao, both lefty and righty, so as you can imagine, people lost their minds. One thing I think was interesting is noticing like the intent, noticing a little bit of the recoil, especially from the left side, and just seeing like even at a younger age he was trying to kind of throw the crap out of the ball, which is going to be relevant later on when we talk about how exactly these patterns have emerged and how he's learned to throw as hard as he does, being a relatively undersized pitcher. He then moved to Florida, and he was actually drafted in 2022 as a switch-hitting shortstop. He wanted to continue pitching. That was kind of his true love, and he ended up going on to college in the States to pursue pitching from both sides. So he was drafted out of Mississippi State. He's actually listed now at 5'11", 200, but some places you'll see him listed at 5'11", 170. He actually explained in an interview he put on about 30 pounds between his freshman year and between his sophomore year. So you look at the velo jump he had between those 2 years and how he kind of shot up draft boards this year as a draft eligible sophomore. And really, you can attribute a lot of this. He already had good patterns, he already moved well, but he actually not only tightened up his command, but the biggest thing is that his velocity increase, likely in part, if not majority of that coming from that actual weight and strength increase. So again, it's not necessarily about the weight per se, it's about the strength and the power output that represents. So you can kind of tell for these clips, like pretty good quality 200-pound athlete, right? He's not super high body fat, clearly moves well, clearly hasn't impeded him at all as far as how athletic he moves on the mound. So we can deduce that he got significantly stronger during this time from freshman to sophomore year. If we look at some of his stats this year, he absolutely carved. 16 starts, he went 8-2, 3.67 ERA, 113 strikeouts to 30 walks over 90 and 2/3 innings. And the biggest thing, he lowered his walk rate from just over 6 to 3.0 per 9. He's definitely not pinpoint. I'm going to pop up on the screen some of the pitch location charts so you can kind of see where he located balls over the course of the year. Definitely not a pinpoint guy, but he's finally in the zone. And so he's getting the ball over the plate, he's lowering that walk rate, and again, that's why he was able to perform as well as he did this year. When asked if he plans to pitch two-way in pro ball, he certainly seems to want to. He said he'll take it as far as he can. When the Mariners were asked about it, they said, we're going to see how pitching in different matchup situations goes, how it works in the minor leagues, and they're very open to using him as a lefty in the big leagues. What's interesting, if we look at his arsenal, is he throws substantially harder from the right side. He also has a much more refined pitch mix from the right side. From the lefty, he kind of profiles as a little bit more of a relief pitcher. He really only has two pitches. He's got the fastball from a lower slot. He's throwing low 90s, getting it up into the mid 90s, and he's got a low 80s slider, which has a little bit more sweep to it. I wasn't able to find the exact metrics for any of his pitches, but a little bit sweepier slider. And again, throwing still more of that four-seam fastball, has a little bit of carry to it, a little bit of run, but curious what the Mariners end up doing with him as far as if they switch him to a little bit more of a sinker, try to generate some additional depth, play into that east-west profile from the left side, and use him a little bit more in these matchup situations and see how that goes. From the right side, throwing mid 90s. Some of his starts, he was actually comfortably sitting like 96, 97, 98. He's been up to 99. Really special arm. So again, he's primarily leaning on the four-seam and on the slider. The slider can take on a little bit of a cuttery profile in the low 90s at times, but it's typically more of that mid 80s gyro slider shape with good depth. He's got a serviceable changeup, serviceable curveball as well. So pretty interesting talent. Here's the pitch grades from MLB.com. For me, I find his fastball to be his best pitch. Again, don't have the exact metrics on it, so we can't put a stuff plus rating on it. This appears to be above average carry. He's a relatively undersized guy, so I imagine his release height is on the lower end. So I'm guessing his VAA, his vertical approach angle, is up on the above average side as well. We look at the velocity, obviously well above average velocity. And then potentially we look at the extension. Some of the sources that I was reading were mentioning that he has above average extension. Again, hard to tell without actually having access to the metrics. But if you look at the side views, he does release way out over his front side. And so appears to have above average vertical break, appears to have above average vertical approach angle, appears to have well above average to plus velocity. And again, the extension is at least average, could be above average as well. So now in his case, right, he already would have been a very highly touted prospect, even if he was just a right-handed pitcher. So he isn't some novelty, he's a legit prospect. And so he just has this upside of potentially being able to do matchups left on left, or if you can continue to improve that side and actually maybe sit mid-90s from the left side. So some advantages, some of these are obvious, some might not be as obvious, but obviously the ability to pitch deeper into starts, whereas most starters might get pulled after 85, 95, 100 pitches, maybe every other inning he's facing a batter from the left side, right? Maybe he gets to the point where he's throwing 100 pitches from the right side and he's throwing 20, 25 pitches from the left side. So he might be able to last an extra inning, possibly even 2 innings into a game, depending on how useful that left side is and how much he decides to use it. So obviously the ability to last deeper into games, saving innings in the bullpen. Obviously has the ability, if he does primarily throw from the right side, perhaps in between those starts, being available to come out of the bullpen and still play that matchup game. Obviously the ability to play platoon matchups, so depending on what hitter's up, lefty, righty, depending on the scouting report, depending on how he's feeling that day, being able to really play into that platoon advantage, so left on left, right on right, or again, depending how he's feeling. So one thing you saw in the Little League World Series clip is his command really wasn't there from the left side that day, so he just switched around to the right side and dominated from there. So in general, pitchers aren't switch pitchers, but if a pitcher has 3, 4, 5 pitches, then on any given day, maybe 1 or 2 of them aren't really working for them, but you still have something you can go to that is working on any given day. And so if he's not feeling quite right from the left side or from the right side or on a certain pitch, like he just has more options to go to, things that will be feeling better on any given day. And then also something that came to mind, being able to attack lefties differently the second or third time through the lineup. So maybe he still is effective against lefties the first time or the second time through the lineup, but maybe the third time through the lineup, which is very common, that's where pitchers start to struggle a little bit. Batting averages, slugging against, WOBA starts to go up. And so him just being able to have a little bit different look, maybe face that lefty once or twice from the right side, once from the left side. Again, just a lot of options here that could really pan out, especially if he's able to go from kind of that matchup lefty specialist type grade from the left side to a little bit more of like a true power mid-90s reliever from the left side. So the other piece of this is horizontal approach angle and which pitch types actually tend to play better with a more extreme horizontal approach angle. So again, imagine from the left side facing a lefty and throwing way back behind him and really getting to that deceptive arm angle where the ball's almost coming back from behind the hitter. That would be an extreme horizontal approach angle. And so Jurrangelo is clearly playing up the horizontal approach angle side from the left side, which if we look at this chart, the red here is whiff rate, and you can see that particularly on breaking balls, these more extreme horizontal approach angles can be really devastating and has a really strong correlation with whiff rate. So if we're trying to maximize whiff rate to lefties from a left-on-left matchup and platoon advantage, then certainly makes sense to potentially look into how do we create additional sweep on that slider, potentially even moving a little bit further towards the first base side of the rubber. Definitely some things to play with there, but you can see there's a significant platoon advantage when it comes to breaking balls. One interesting quote from him, he actually views each delivery from the left and the right side as like a completely different thing. He said you have to treat each arm different, you've got to use different muscle memory from each side, it's totally different, so yes, your mind has to work differently. Now, what he's getting at, kind of interesting because we're obviously be able to control the left side of our body with the right hemisphere of our brain and the right side of our body with the left hemisphere of our brain. So the fact that like there aren't that many people that we can really ask them this question, like how do you do it, how does it feel? And it's interesting that he actually conceptualizes this as like 2 completely different patterns. And that would make sense, again, thinking about how the different sides of the brain controls different parts of the body. But again, I found that to be super interesting. Can anyone learn to do this? Again, there aren't that many people, I would say, who've necessarily tried to do this at a high level, but I would suspect yes, at or before a certain age. We have coaches at our facility who mess around, throw a couple times a week with their offhand, and have gotten into the upper 70s, 80 miles an hour in some cases, as pitchers who throw mid-90s plus. But again, these are guys that are 25, 26 years old that didn't try to do this from a young age. You're probably familiar with Billy Wagner and his situation where when he was younger, he actually broke his arm, a natural righty, and he started teaching himself how to throw lefty. And obviously, incredible career as a left-handed reliever. Pat Venditti, another example of a ambidextrous pitcher. And in his case, like, probably wasn't good enough independently as a lefty or a righty to ever be a big leaguer, but just combined, it kind of gave him that particular advantage, being able to play the platoon matchups. And so again, I don't think there are that many examples right now, but I feel like this is something that's probably going to get more and more common as it becomes known that this is a doable thing, as long as it's likely worked on from a young age. So interesting place to put a little bit of research into over the coming decades, and I think this will be more and more common in the future, although still somewhat of a rarity. What about throwing back-to-back days? So you might think, oh, he's able to throw with both sides. He should just throw 100 pitches on Monday, lefty, and throw 100 pitches on Tuesday, righty, and just throw double the workload. My instinct on that is that I don't think this would work quite as well because it's not factoring in the systemic fatigue that takes place from pitching. So you look at the actual, muscular fatigue that's happening at the arm itself, that glove arm is going to be fresh the next day. That's not where a lot of the fatigue is being induced. But you look at the overall systemic fatigue, you look at the central nervous system fatigue, the overall fatigue throughout the entire body, the impact on sleep and recovery. Any pitchers watching this can relate. You have a 7 o'clock game ends at 10, you pitched or you came out of the bullpen, charged up on adrenaline. Your sleep tends to suffer that same night. Even if you didn't take caffeine or anything before the game, you're in that sympathetic, high nervous system activation state. Sleep tends to suffer that night. Instead of every 5th day, you're starting twice every 5th day. Right? That's going to impact recovery. And then looking at lower body, core fatigue, like all these other muscles are still involved, whether you're throwing lefty, whether you're throwing righty. So I'd be interested to see exactly what his throwing workloads look like on both sides. I highly doubt that it's going to be double the total workload of what a typical righty or lefty would do. So if a typical righty or lefty might throw 2 35-pitch bullpens a week in the off season, right? He might very well throw 2 35-pitch bullpens with his left and his right hand. But I would think there is probably going to be a what's called MRV, maximum recoverable volume, somewhere in there where it's like, what is the point at which I can still, my overall body can recover, my legs can recover, my core can recover, and I'm still able to get a lot of work in on both sides. Again, it might be double what a typical pitcher could do, but my guess would be something like 1.5 to 1.75 times what his normal workload would be if he was just focusing on his right or left side. So I think you're probably going to see that there is some overlap between the two patterns, and that overall volume would likely have to be a little bit lower. And this addresses the question we got when I mentioned that we're going to be doing this breakdown. Like, have we trained any switch pitchers at Tread? Well, not to my knowledge. We've coached 6,000 plus pitchers at this point remotely. We've coached all-stars, we've coached knuckleballers who've gotten signed, we've coached girls who've thrown mid-80s and set the world record for velo. We have not trained switch pitchers to my knowledge. So this is just an interesting thing that I would love firsthand experience eventually one day, working with a switch pitcher to try to figure out what's the overall impact on the system throwing from both sides. So something interesting that the Mariners are going to have to figure out, they're going to have to weigh, and they're going to have to see how much volume he can recover from on the right and left side. If they're trying to prioritize his right side, how much work do we need to put on the left side before it starts to interfere with his bullpens, his recovery from the right side? But why does he throw harder righty versus lefty? Because he's been up to 99 righty, he's been up to 95 lefty. Is this as simple as he's just had more practice from the right side? What exactly is going on here? Are his mechanics just better from the right side? There's obviously a clear trend of righties throwing harder in general over the course of the entire game at every level. There's a trend that righties throw harder. This is a phenomenon that I would say is not clear, right? It's a debate that hasn't been fully settled. But there's a lot of ideas floating around on why righties tend to throw harder than lefties. Is there an environmental nurture side of it? Probably. Lefties can typically get by throwing a little bit slower and still having success at every level of the game because it's a more novel, more deceptive, less common thing. So they can get by typically with a little bit worse stuff. But I don't think that fully answers the whole question. However, one argument is that the hardest throwing pitcher of all time, Aroldis Chapman, is a lefty. However, almost every other 100+ mile an hour guy that you can think of is a righty. So there does seem to be a subtle bias in favor of righties throwing just a touch harder than lefties, all else equal. Again, there aren't that many guys to look at that throw with both sides, but Pat Venditti again follows this pattern, up to 91 from the right side, mid-upper 80s guy, and mid-80s touching 88 from the left side. So still a few mile an hour difference between the right side and the left side. One interesting explanation for this that some people have thrown around is just that we as humans are innately asymmetrical. We have some physiological asymmetries in terms of our general body structure, in terms of our organ distribution. Heart's in the upper left quadrant, biased to the left side. Our liver's biased to the lower right side. We just have innately asymmetrical muscle attachments, muscle mass. And so again, these slight asymmetries tend to put humans a little bit shifted into the right side of their body and a little bit counter-rotated. And so this might lead itself to the average human can actually rotate a little bit better when rotating the left or throwing or swinging with the right hand or the right side. So again, it's an argument, it's a debate, it's an open-ended discussion, but potential explanation for why he might be throwing a little bit harder from the right side. All right, so this is what you guys have been waiting for. We're gonna get into the breakdown, the general framework for mechanical breakdowns, how we view high-level delivery. There's really a few different phases. I'm gonna pop up the general flow chart on the screen here of if we had to explain it in the most simple possible terms. This is what you look for. You're ideally trying to find a way to generate linear momentum and convert that linear momentum into rotation or angular momentum, funnel that up the chain from the hips and the ground up through the upper half, and ultimately get that energy and that momentum out and around into the arm and into the ball. Again, that's from a pure physics standpoint, what mechanical efficiency looks like. Obviously, there's plenty of quirks that go into making a ball move in crazy ways, being able to command the baseball, being able to actually perform at a high level, but purely when it comes to, from a physics standpoint, the efficiency of the delivery. The different phases, we have the drift phase, the hinge or the linear move phase, the rotate or pelvic unload phase. We have the block phase where that lead leg blocks the pelvis and lets the pelvis decelerate into something. We have the arm spiral phase, we have the arm acceleration phase, and then we have the arm deceleration phase. So if we go through these in sequence, we look at his drift. So we can go through these in sequence. Does he initiate a forward shifting of the center of mass as he lifts his leg? And so you can look at his head right here, check out where the cursor is by his ear, and as I play it forward, you can see the drift. So you can see his center of mass moves forward a few inches. And again, that's a key point with the drift, is over drifting is actually counterproductive because you end up losing the back leg, you end up losing that back foot stability, and then it actually impedes your ability to get into that linear move and that hinge and maintain good direction from the backside. So he has a subtle drift, he gets everything going forward early. He has good rhythm, he has a little bit of like a foot tap mechanism, which he does from the left side too. We'll get into that in a second. But he has an initial drift, which gets the center of mass going forward early. He also gets into the hinge where he's riding his pelvis sideways. He's in internal rotation here. He's guiding his center of mass and guiding his pelvis in a closed orientation towards the target, building potential energy as he rides towards the target. You can see he's fully closed. He's showing the side of that lead shoe or lead cleat towards the target. He's maintaining the stacked position with the upper half. The rotation phase is being able to pop the hips open into landing and take all that linear momentum you've built towards the target and pop that into landing. The hips open up, the shoulders stay closed. And so now you've converted that linear into rotation, and now he's able to actually send that energy up the chain. So I'm actually gonna pull this up now in the side-by-side software so we can put some angles on it and illustrate some of these things a little bit closer. As he drifts, gets the center mass going forward, he's able to find the back leg, capture that drift and ride a stable back leg forward, ride his center of mass down the mound, mirroring the slope as far as he can. Just before landing, he's able to pop the hips open into landing, and then watch how that energy funnels its way out and around into the arm. So as he begins to rotate, and again, this is just in general, things he's doing very well on both sides. We'll get into what he's doing a little bit different side to side in a second, but that energy finds its way into the arm. You can see that arm unfurls out and around in plane on both sides, and the arm decelerates cross body to dissipate that force. So generally speaking, from a big picture standpoint, that is what he's doing very well, and why he's throwing upper 90s from the right side and throwing 90 plus up to 95 from the left side. But let's get into some of the things that are a little bit different. So at a glance, you can see there are a ton of similarities side to side. So you might think this was like a mirrored video at first glance. I know for me, starting to dive into the video, I'm like, this is very similar, and you have to really look and dig to find what's different. But again, very similar positions in terms of the initial leg lift, very similar hinge positions. You can see he even has like a little bit of a hooking of the wrist, which I'm not as much a fan of here because there can be some tension through the flexor when you get overly hooked through the wrist. But he's doing that on both sides. Similar postural angle on both sides. Arm timing is similar on both sides. Level of separation, fairly similar both sides. And then again, arm slot is a little bit different, which we'll talk about, but isn't that dissimilar. A few inches likely difference in release height here. So he's doing a lot very similar. I'm gonna put the side view up on the screen here so you can see even like the lead leg looks very similar. There's a lot of similarities mechanically. So the first big difference that I noticed actually comes when he drops into his backside, and it's the depth of back leg flexion. Play this through a couple times. Now watch as he gets into his back leg, and I put the angle here so you can see. He ends up getting into significantly more sit, a deeper hinge, more backside tension. And this is really relevant because watch what happens as he's able to ride this deeper hinge position with a little bit more tension through his back hip. Watch the back foot. I want you to keep your eye on the back foot on the left and the back foot on the right. As the hips begin to unload, watch what happens. You can already see it. You can already see the back foot is starting to come off the rubber and turn over a little bit earlier. back foot turned over, back foot turned over, back foot turned over. And so we take him to landing. And this is probably the biggest difference between lefty and righty, is back foot never actually gets turned over. The hips actually don't ever get fully through into landing on the left side, whereas you can see those hips get fully through. He's significantly more open with the pelvis at landing while keeping the upper half closed, and he gets that back foot turned over. He gets the hips cleared. He gets the hips through into landing. This is actually a substantial difference. So by the time this foot reaches a vertical position, once it fully turns over, right there, watch where the hips are, watch where the upper half is. The upper half is very open towards the target, whereas again, you can see he gets that foot turned over and that back foot through and the hips through substantially sooner on the right. How does he do that? Well, he's not just trying to turn his back foot over earlier, right? He's basically just loading more tension into the backside, and he's able to more powerfully unload that tension from the hips. You can see that back foot is pulled off the rubber by the rotation of the pelvis. Whereas on the left side, you can see that the hips just kind of like peek open. That back foot isn't powerfully turned over. There's no powerful rotation of the hips. It kind of just falls or leaks open with the pelvis. And so for me, that's the biggest issue. We look at the level of flip up, the position of the arm at landing. He's in a good spot here. The reference range with our in-house motion capture system on professionals is ballpark 85 to 95 degrees of shoulder abduction. So is that arm roughly in line with his trunk at landing? In his case, yes. You could argue, is it a hair low on the right side? Potentially a few degrees low. Again, hard to tell without having put him through a true motion capture assessment. If we look at the degree of external rotation, so how on time is his arm at landing, our motion capture system, the reference ranges for our hard throwing pros is between about 63 and 90 degrees. So that arm being fully up at landing or within about 30 degrees of being fully up. So you can see, again, he's in a pretty good spot in both cases by the time that front foot actually touches down. So he's in a good spot as far as the actual external rotation, how on time his arm is. So what about scap retraction? Again, we don't have an exact number on this, but is he getting the arm back behind the body and generating a stretch through his chest to be able to actually accelerate and pull into bar release? Again, don't have a number on it, but he definitely is. You can see substantial daylight between his arm flipping up, and the back of his head. And again, on both sides, he's getting into that good deep stretch position with his upper half. The acceleration phase is next. And so this is where the pelvis has begun to rotate, the trunk has begun to rotate, and the arm is sequentially brought into the throw at the later phases of the throw. And so as the torso begins to turn, the arm is left behind. It creates a stretch through the pecs and through that fascia on the front side of the shoulder. And there's a slingshot mechanism where that arm is pulled into ball release. So we look at some of the reference ranges from our motion capture system. At external rotation and at ball release, what is the height of the elbow, right? We're looking for something around 90 degrees at max external rotation. So right about here, we're looking for this angle on both sides to be right about 90 degrees. You can see he's pretty close on both sides. And then at ball release, you're still looking for that angle to be right about 85 to 95 degrees. And so essentially what that is the arm finds plane at landing and then unfurls, spirals out and around into ball release, maintaining that angle at the armpit of roughly 90 degrees. Now he's a little bit more mobile pitcher. So maximum external rotation, how much does his arm actually lay back? I'm gonna put a side view up here, but you can see potentially a little bit looser actually from the left side, but he's got substantially more range of motion here than a lot of pitchers. So our reference range is about 176 to 190 degrees of external rotation. And again, you can see he's getting more than 180 degrees of layback. If we draw an angle from this side view from the left side and we take a look at what 180 degrees of layback would look like, well, that would be a line perpendicular to the angle of his spine right here. So that would be a line roughly here. He's about 10 degrees past that. So he's somewhere around 190 degrees of layback, which would be at the very top end of our reference range for pros. Now, if we pull up a side view, one thing that stands out is the trunk posture. And so from the right side, you can see that as he drives into landing, he maintains the stacked position. His head is back over the back hip. And into landing, again, the hip's clear like we talked about, that back foot gets turned over. But where actually is his torso at landing? Well, he's still in a very stacked position, right? He's not perfectly up and down, he's a couple degrees forward, but this would be considered a stacked position. If we look at the reference range for trunk lateral tilt at foot strike, for our pros, it's between -2 and 4 degrees, so right around stacked position plus or minus 5 degrees. If we look at the left side, we look at the position that he gets into at landing, you can see that he's substantially forward, right? The angle that he's creating here is substantially forward, maybe 15 or even 20 plus degrees. And so again, this might have to do with him being more mobile on the left side, potentially. And there are certain pitchers where this actually represents an advantage for them. So Camilo Duvall with the Giants, he lands way more forward than this. But again, he's so mobile that this might actually represent an advantageous position to be able to take out all the slack from that more mobile shoulder. So could be a flaw. But again, if he ends up being more mobile on the left side, this might be advantageous. But I have a feeling that in his case, he's actually landing a little bit forward with the upper half because he doesn't do as good of a job of staying in that backside and riding the backside as long with as much tension and a little bit deeper hinge as he potentially could. This would be something for him to have to play with, split test, see if it works for him, because there's no way to be 100% certain that would be a positive change for him. But seeing some of the angles he's creating, I think that could be some of the disconnect and could at least bridge the gap with a couple miles an hour of that 5 mile an hour difference he has between the left and right side. Going back to the back view side by side, the other main difference is arm slot. And I kind of already alluded to the arm slot side of it, but it comes down to the level of trunk tilt that he's able to create. So that level of contralateral trunk tilt, that lateral degree, will influence the actual arm slot. So you can see, again, subtle, but definitely creates a higher tilt from the right side. So the actual vertical break he's gonna be able to create on a fastball. Again, don't have an exact number here, but you just look at the angle of the hand as it pulls through the ball. And he's somewhere around 1 o'clock axis with his four-seam fastball on the right side. You can see about 25 degrees of trunk tilt here. And then on the left side, I've drawn a line through the angle that his hand creates on the ball. And you can see if that were perfectly mirrored, that would be something like an 11 o'clock axis. He's a substantially lower axis, something around 10, 15 from the left side. And so he's just not gonna be able to create the same vertical break. This might be 10, 11, 13 inches of vertical break for most pitchers. Again, don't know exactly what he is. And this might be 16, 17, 18 inches of vertical break from this type of axis for most righties with good efficiency. And so this comes down again to trunk tilt as well. He's right in that reference range for our hard throwing pros. 18 to 30 degrees of trunk tilt will represent somewhere between that low 3/4 and high 3/4 type arm slot. Again, arm is in plane here. So again, I'm not in a place to make a recommendation to a first rounder who just signed for almost $5 million, but I will say that something I'd be interested in seeing him try, or the Mariners will likely have him try at some point, is I think he really could sit 2 miles an hour harder from the left side. I think this is a guy that if he was able to find a little bit more tension, a little bit more sit in that backside, in the left hip from the left side, then this could be a guy that isn't just a matchup lefty pitcher, but he could actually sit 93, 95, touch 96, touch 97, and that would completely change the game in terms of the weapons that he has. Now, having not put him through a movement screen, strength power testing, anything like that, there's not really a way to know. He could actually be limited in adductor length on the left side, so he could have a less mobile groin, which makes it harder to actually sit into the backside. He could have less hip internal rotation on the left side due to a pelvic imbalance, which again will make it harder to sit into the backside, as he could have something in his ankle, limited foot pronation or eversion. There's a lot of things that could be influencing how he actually sits into the back hip on the left side. But assuming that none of these are the case, or that you're able to correct some of these things, open up a little bit of range of motion, then if he was able to get the hips through a little bit more, so have a little bit more pelvic rotation into landing, get that back foot turned over into landing. Again, even with the slightly lower slot, I think there's 2 miles an hour still potentially left on the table. This is something that could be looked at, monitored on a markerless motion capture system like we have. This is something that can be monitored from a force plate mound as well. And again, it might not work, and it just ends up being a power righty who can be a lefty matchup guy. But I do think there's some velocity left on the table. Again, especially how young he is, and especially with the velocity jump he just made over the past 365 days. A couple miscellaneous things that I do want to briefly touch on. He seems to have some general idea of how to utilize his arsenal to this point. His usage for the fastball from the right side is, roughly speaking, biased towards the top part of the zone, which is likely where his fastball is going to play the best, having a little bit of carry to it. He's getting the gyro slider down for the most part. He's not being super fine with it, or if he's trying to be, probably isn't the right move right now, because it's clearly that his command isn't quite at a point where he needs to be super pinpoint. If you look at some of the pitch charts here, you can see like there definitely are still plenty of sprays. And so for him, just making sure he's in the zone, throwing good stuff in the zone, appears to be the biggest difference and the biggest adjustment that he's made this year. Is just making sure he's in the zone, doesn't have pinpoint command. And that could be something that over time he starts to be able to more consistently get his fastball to the top half of the zone, more particularly get the gyro slider to the bottom part of the zone. For the mental game, obviously he's had success at this point. He's pitched in front of large crowds. He's pitched against high competition, so that doesn't seem to be a huge concern. he seems like somebody who can go out there and be a gamer, which is definitely encouraging, cool to see. So I'm interested to continue following his career through the minor leagues and hopefully as a big leaguer. And another interesting thing he said, I'll play the clip right here, is he actually fields ground balls to keep his athleticism. So
I mean, I gained a couple more pounds, but the one thing that I actually do so I can stay like athletic, just like getting a lot of ground balls still and shortstop, just to keep moving.
Mississippi State didn't let him make a ton of throws here, but just to keep his athleticism and keep that feeling of moving his feet and not losing athleticism as he put on 30 pounds. There's tons of different ways to keep the feet moving and maintain that athleticism, but I just thought that was really cool to see that someone's at least recommended he continue doing that. Guys, thanks for making it to this part of the video. If you're still here and you don't know about TREAD, we work with over 2,000 pitchers all around the globe, across 50 states, across 20 countries, every MLB organization, every college conference. This year alone, we just had 11 more MLB draft picks. We've had 7 MLB debuts to this point in the year. But again, it's a remote training model. And so we're able to help guys all around the world, regardless of their situation, get better. So if you want to learn more about how that works, if you want to connect with our team and just discuss your specific situation, I'm going to go ahead and link a video up above about how exactly remote training works and how to get in touch with us. If not, I'd love to hear from you guys about what breakdown you'd like to see me do next. Any other video ideas you have, drop a comment down below. We will read every single comment and try to respond to as many of those as we can. So again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.
¡Vamos!